Hey, before we get started, I just want to say a little note about this episode, that it features one of my best friends talking in the way that he truly, honestly talks, which means he uses the F word a lot. I mean, a lot. And so just a fair warning, you're about to hear it.
This is such an exciting moment for some of my best friends because I have been dying to essentially probe the inner and outer limits of Ben's Judaism and his whiteness. And I couldn't think of a better person.
A better, whiter, or more Jewish person.
than his actual best friend from college when you guys met.
I will say, though, that by the end of this, I feel like Ben needs to decide who his best friend is. I mean, I feel like we need to see it's really, because listen, I've listened to every single fucking one of these, man. And I'm going through a really painful divorce. Every single one you guys say I love you to each other. You know how painful that's been for me? You know how much that's hurt? I love you, Ben. I love you, Khalil. And I'm just sitting there listening to it as I take like an endless fucking walk through New York City, looking at everyone who's happy but me. And I got to listen to that shit. Get the fuck out of here.
Listen,
We love you, Sascha.
I think there is room. There is enough love in the world to share. We love you too, man.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see how this goes.
I'm Khalil Gibran Muhammad.
And I'm Ben Austen. We're two best friends.
One black.
One white.
I'm a historian.
And I'm a journalist.
And this is Some of My Best Friends Are.
Yep, some of my best friends are. In this show, we wrestle with the challenges
and the absurdities
of a deeply divided and unequal country.
And this episode, we are marking the end of Hanukkah.
Ha ha Hanukkah, done and gone.
Yeah, so we're going to look at Judaism and whiteness. We're going to understand race and racism through some of the deepest histories and some of the most important questions in this episode. And we have a special guest to help us do that.
Something folk, no need to be slow. Mama Mary gone off to work. Now her house and nothing's back.
Hey, can we ask Sascha to introduce himself?
Yes.
Sure. I am Sascha Penn. I am a very old friend of Ben Austen. We met in college at the University of Rochester. I'm a writer. I write movies and television shows. I am currently actually on set on the show Power Book 3, Raising Kanan, which I created and I run. It's a spin-off of Power, which was a series on the Starz network, and this is the sort of the third iteration of that.
Yeah, Sascha, you're actually on location right now in a trailer somewhere in Queens, filming the second season of Raising Kanan. Can you say something about what's going on with the show in the second season?
I mean, yes. Season 2, what we start to see is like some real distance between Rock and Kanan. Like that relationship starts to really evolve in interesting ways. And so, you know, that relationship between Kanan and his mother becomes increasingly complicated. And I will say that the season does end, because we're getting close to shooting the end in spectacular fashion. You will be stunned and amazed.
Love it. We are really grateful for you taking some time.
Oh man, I'm so happy to be here.
So let's get into this. So I think it's really important first to just establish. Just tell us how you and Ben met.
We met through my roommate at University of Rochester one night in our dorm, and the rest is history. There it is, you know.
Okay, but I want to know that first moment when you meet this guy, because I send him away to college. You know, I've known him from 14 to 18. He's my best friend. You know, he doesn't wear Judaism on his sleeve. What was your first impression of Ben when he showed up at Rochester?
Well, I'll say this, like, I would never have known in a million years Ben was Jewish. Like that's, I mean, I'll say that right off the bat. And I think I probably made judgments about him based on the fact that he played on the tennis team, because tennis, as you guys discussed in a prior episode.
A fantastic episode, a great episode.
Absolutely. Is a somewhat rarefied sport in terms of what your background has to be.
Because Jews weren't admitted to country clubs either, tennis clubs,
Correct.
golf clubs. I get it.
Correct.
I get it.
So
yeah.
I was like, oh, he's a guy who's probably pretty wealthy, plays tennis. I mean, I liked Ben, obviously. I mean, we became, best friends, or I was like his second best friend, apparently. I didn't know that at the time that I was going to be his second best friend. And I will say, interestingly enough, Ben was a more observant Jew than me. So
in
Ben
college.
would go to services
I was
at
checking
college.
it out.
I never did. But I think that might have been the way I found out that Ben was even Jewish. Like he said, oh, I'm going to Hillel or whatever the hell it was. And I was like, really? Okay. All right, cool.
That kind of surprises me. I mean, because the Jewishness of Ben that I knew was Shabbat dinner on Fridays, which usually went from dinner to poker.
Khalil is like, I went to Shabbat dinner at your house every Friday, and I didn't know you were Jewish.
No, I'm not saying that.
And you're Jewish?
I'm saying that was the extent of it. I mean, and so I didn't really even understand what all of that meant. I mean,
you have to understand, obviously, everyone experiences their own Jewishness or whatever, their cultural identity differently. My parents were both immigrants, but I did not come from a family that really did those kinds of traditions. We would go for the high holidays for sure, which is like...
But you had a bar mitzvah, though.
I did. I went to Jewish day school like Ben early on, and I remember every Friday the kids at school would have Shabbat dinner. And I remember saying to my parents, this was my parents were still together, I was pretty young, and I was like, we should do Shabbat dinner. And I think we did it 2 weeks, and then they were both like, nah, man, fuck this. We're done with Shabbat dinner. And I remember feeling really somehow I was failing because everyone I knew was doing it, right? And I wasn't. And I just felt wow, we're not good at that. We're not good at being Jews. So it was I had an uneasy relationship, I think, with my Jewishness as a youngster.
Sascha, I get it, man. I mean, that discomfort. If I'm honest, I probably felt that way as a young kid in the Nation of Islam mosques. I mean, I went a few times, and my parents divorced when I was pretty young, and so the whole thing was a little weird when I was a kid. But this does have me thinking about Ben, right? And I'm wondering. So, at best I know, you got a lot of your Jewish identity, at least from going to a Jewish day school. So, what was that experience like?
Yeah. I went to that Jewish day school until 5th grade, and when I transferred to public school, and I wasn't a good student at all. I actually failed davening, which is prayer. And my mom was like, damn, only God can fail a kid in prayer, I think I was definitely trying to figure stuff out, though, about the larger community. So I lived in a largely black community, and within it, this Jewish community. And moving through space, trying to even sort of look to the Jewish part to understand the larger part, So trying to understand what it meant to be part of a community. We had this teacher who was teaching an ethics class, Mr. Levy. He was the principal of the school. And he asked us one day, what should you do if you find $5 outside of a synagogue? And, we're like, I don't know. We start to talk about it.
Invest it.
Invest it. And so he finally gets around to it, and he gives the answer, and he says, you take it inside and give it to the front office. You give it to the synagogue. And I was like, this motherfucker. I was like, And I raised my hand and I said, Mr. Levy, what if you find it outside a church?
Ooh, good question.
Thank you. And in South Shore where I lived, it was all synagogues because the neighborhood had been Jewish about 15 years before my family arrived there.
That's right.
And now all those synagogues were churches. And Mr. Levy, he's this egg-shaped man, and he looks at me with his slit eyes, and he said, keep it.
There you go.
That is jacked up.
I was like, all right. So I wasn't finding lessons in, as Sascha was saying, sort of the formal religious teachings of the school that helped me understand my world. And I will say that where I did find it was more in the cultural Judaism. If it wasn't in religion, being a cultural Jew, I was like, oh, I can understand stuff. That there were other Jews making jokes, that there were other Jews telling stories, that there were other Jews who were making sense of a lot of these issues. And for me specifically, about race and figuring out their place in the world.
Yeah.
Look, obviously Jews, like black folks, are not monolithic. You have Reform Jews, you have conservative Jews, you have Orthodox Jews, then you have the Hasidic Jews, then you have,
You have Jews of color, right?
Yeah, exactly. It does speak to, the complexities of Judaism, right?
Past and present.
Which is, there's this sort of religious aspect to it, and then there's also a cultural aspect to it, and also there's a very big difference between sort of European Jews, which is what my parents were, having fled the Holocaust, or not even fled, surviving the Holocaust, versus American Jews who'd already been here for a number of generations. Like, I'm the first generation of my family to be born here in the United States.
Yeah, Sascha, I guess I don't think about it a lot, but I'm on my father's side, I'm first generation too. My dad is born in Nazi Germany in 1937, and he leaves when he's very young. He leaves in 1939. And his father is arrested. He manages to get free. So, there was real risk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listening to both you and Sascha tell these stories about being, the first in your family to be born, in the United States, I am curious, how did you both learn about the Holocaust, and, what kind of effect did that have, that experience of learning about it, of learning about what happened to your relatives, have on you as a young person? Like, did it become a defining thing in your understanding of being Jewish?
I think for me, it did. It became the defining aspect of my Jewishness to a certain extent. Like, my last name is Penn. Of course, that's not really my last name. The last name was Penkinski. But when my family got here, it was like, nah, man, we need to change our name so they can't track us down. I mean, my father's a Holocaust survivor. My mother fled Vichy France, before things got super duper crazy. But my dad was a Holocaust survivor. And so he didn't talk about it at all, really. Like, one of the things about my dad, which of course I didn't learn this until much later, is he lived in this house at one point where you had to walk up these stairs to get to the main floor. And it was like a really noisy hallway, and I would come in and I would open his door and I'd walk up the stairs, and he would always, every time, hello, you'd panic, who is it? And I was like, damn, man, it's me, relax, shit. And come to find out that when he was a kid, he was hidden in basements all the time, while people walked overhead, and he would hear the footsteps. And so when he would hear these footsteps come, it would create this incredibly visceral reaction for him. Had a very similar reaction when it came to the police. Anyone in a uniform, my dad would shit himself. I mean, I remember him getting pulled over for speeding, and he was basically like face down on the pavement before they even got to the car. You know what I mean? He was like, take me away,
Yeah, I give in.
And so, I think my Jewishness obviously is inextricably linked to this trauma. But what's been interesting is when I've had kids, it has felt more important to me that they identify as Jewish, which I didn't necessarily expect.
So Ben, for you, I mean, obviously the same question applies.
Yeah, I mean, so my father's parents still had German accents, my whole life. They never lost their accents. And so, we understood this history. We didn't sort of like unpack it as a family, at all. Like, we didn't talk about it in great length. I went to Jewish day school, and the stuff about the Holocaust was just part of the conversation in a way. It's interesting. I mean, that sense of being tied to trauma as part of your identity, I probably feel differently than Sascha. I mean, I feel very much like it's part of my history as a Jew, but I'm not. But maybe less part of my personal. Like, I didn't experience it personally.
Yeah. I mean, the Holocaust was experienced very differently by different Jews around the world at the time. And so for example, like, my grandmother was really wary of quote unquote American Jews, because in her account, my family was being slaughtered in Europe, and the Jews in the United States weren't doing shit about it. And so, ultimately, my father and my grandmother, the way they got to this country is a Jewish family sponsored them and paid for them to come over here. That's how they got here. But my grandmother, she sort of felt like the Holocaust had been co-opted by people who really didn't do enough at the time to really help those who were actually victimized by the Holocaust.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
I think, the interesting conversation to have is Jewishness and whiteness, and what is that, and what is that relationship, and how does that work, and all that kind of stuff. Because
right.
As I was raised, I was certainly not raised to believe that we were quote unquote white. You know what I mean? I was raised to believe we were Jewish, which was not white.
Yeah.
And do you think the difference is that white people, the other people, think of us as lesser?
I mean, my father actually said it to me straight up. He said, "White people tried to kill me."
Yeah.
So, for him, it was very, very clear that no, that's not who the fuck we are.
Mm-hmm.
Those people want us dead.
In David Lee Roth, in his memoir, the lead singer, Van Halen, he says that he gives a speech at like his niece's bat mitzvah, and he says, "Remember, you're not white. Nobody thinks you're white. You're Jewish." And then he does this split and jumps up, and
And then he pops the balloon he jumps up and pops the balloon with his foot.
With
Can I just tell you guys, I'm sitting here on Zoom looking at you both. I'm in between you both, which is just the miracle of fate that I happen to be. And I feel like for the first time in my life, I've arrived at the moment when I wanted to be a fly on the wall when white people and Jewish people talked about each other.
Here you are.
And here we have it.
It's like Jews and black people on the screen fighting racism together through comedy.
All right, man, I am enjoying this. I got Ben in the hot seat. I got Sascha dropping bombs everywhere.
Bring it.
I'm learning so much about heritage, about immigration, about personal choice. It's awesome. And so the thing that I'm really curious about now is, listen, both of you are writers. Both of you have committed your professional lives to making and to creating knowledge. Ben, you as a journalist, so much of your work has been really about race and racism. And Sascha, I mean, you've got this incredible career of these amazing stories, and many of them are about Black people. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, help me understand, how did this happen? Sascha, you first.
Look, I've thought a lot about this, I have to say. I think about it all the time because, the show that I created, the show that I run is very much, a Black show. That's what it is. And as a kid, I always gravitated towards books by Richard Wright. And I remember, reading Man Child in the Promised Land, the Claude Brown book. And I've talked about that. And those books really...
That was heavy stuff.
Yeah, it really resonated with me. And I think part of what resonated with me was, I always felt a little bit like... as a kid, especially because I was the son of immigrants and I didn't know any other kids whose parents were immigrants and all, I always felt like I was somewhat looking in from the outside. And I feel like in some of those books and some of those experiences, there were themes and ideas that really resonated with me, right? But I think more than anything, my family existed in this cauldron of injustice, right? And I think that very much informed my worldview and the things that were important to me and the issues that were important to me and frankly the stories that were important to me,
When I think of my own identity, I think of my identity that I'm Jewish, that I'm white. I'm also a South Sider. I'm from the South Side of Chicago. And, as a writer and a journalist, I wanted to solve in some way for injustice. I wanted to sort of, investigate inequalities and try to make them right. And being from the South Side of Chicago and looking at the injustices around here, most of them happen to Black people. Not all of them, most of them. And so there are other Jews from my community who are also deeply involved in that, involved in civil rights back in the day, and also at my synagogue now, who are engaged in these issues and these questions, because those are the surrounding communities. That's the world we're trying to make sense of.
I remember this so well. And because it's always stayed with me. I think you were on Tavis Smiley at one point when Tavis Smiley was still somewhere you could still be on. But I remember you said the two defining moments of my life so far were Rodney King and O.J. Simpson. And I remember when you said that, I'm like, yeah, those are the two defining moments of my life too. You know, like, that's the thing that's kind of amazing about this, which is like, if you're our age and you grew up at that time, like, how can those two things not be? I don't give a fuck if you're white or black. How can those two things not be,
or Asian, or
the defining moments of your life? I mean, it speaks to the American experience.
And the truth is, we're not talking about being black or Jewish or anything. We're talking about just being a good human being, and that if you see something wrong, you wanna do something about it.
I mean, you set up an awesome segue to come back to Sascha. So with the most recent sequel, The Power Book 3, Raising Kanan, which just finished its first season, which was incredible.
Thank you.
Stephanie and I were there for the premiere this past summer, and you took the stage to really introduce the vision for this new Power series. And you told a story. You told a story about your father's immigrant experience in the United States as inspiration for this Black family story that you were about to premiere. What you said is that the struggle of this family is a universal story of a lot of immigrant experiences.
Right.
And the quest for power, for dignity, for visibility is something that you felt from your father's experience.
Right.
And it helped you to see in these characters something that you thought the audience would really admire and appreciate.
Yeah. My father, when he came to this country, and keep in mind, my father had died about a month and a half before the premiere, so, you know, it was very, very fresh for me.
He was on your mind a lot.
Yeah, he was, and he had died sort of suddenly. So, but when he came to this country, you know, the way he learned about America was through popular culture, was through movies, through TV. You know, that's how he assimilated. Skip Gates wrote something in the New York Times a few weeks ago about, you know, who gets to tell what stories. And where he ends up is like anyone can tell anyone's stories. And he says it's important that happens. I agree. And yet at the same time, I'm very sensitive, especially given what I do and the stories that we tell on this show, of who I am and how these stories are told. And listen, there may be a lot of people who are like, nah, fuck that. And that is certainly their right to say that. But I think that if we get to a place where, like, I can only tell a Jewish story, you can only tell an Asian, what does that say about us as a society? Like, I'm not willing to take it that far down the continuum, right? Because I don't want my kids to grow up in that world, you know? And I do think that again, and it goes back to, I guess, the speech I gave at the premiere, the stories about ourselves are the way that we share our experiences with other people, and they share their experiences with us, and we try to understand them. I mean, that's the human experience. Like, you know, in our brain, it's like we turn everything into a story.
Yeah, I agree with you about you know, the need to tell stories that however we define our limited identity. I mean, like, one of the things we're talking about is that identity is really mixed up.
Yeah.
Like it's, you know, there's a sort of hybrid sense of who we are. And so you're finding universalities and connections. And the dangers happen when we sort of see otherness and think of it as something, you know, very foreign and exotic and fixed. And there isn't either the work to understand how people are different or to sort of see the connections.
Isn't it plainer than that, right? Like, but I mean, because the truth is, like, the overriding tradition is not the moment when people authentically reach for the experiences of others and try to understand them on their own terms. The experience in this country has mostly been to caricature Blackness, right? Like, American popular culture came into being caricaturing Black life. It was the essence of American culture in the 19th century, from the vaudeville stage to minstrelsy to the blackface traditions. Every seminal moment in American popular culture was defined by some moment of taking the raw material of Black life, not out of ignorance and distance, but out of familiarity and proximity, by actually being close to Black people and turning them into monsters or children or pickaninnies or sambos or fill in the blank. And I'm not saying those things are one and the same, what you're describing about what happens today, but that is the weight of history. That is the longer story. And of course, I mean, what is so wonderful about this conversation is that both of you embody the counter push against that, and for reasons that, I think have a lot to do with your own personal journeys.
Right.
Ben, I mean, in this, I know this is a lot of history in this moment, but this is exactly my point about what you do.
Right.
I mean, I remember you telling me the story about someone coming up to you when you were doing a book talk about your book about, very poor Black people living in Cabrini Green and all the amazing things that they did, to make fuller lives for themselves. And I think you told me something to the effect, someone was like, well, why you, Ben Austen, did you choose to write this book?
Yeah. I get asked all the time, what made you want to do this? And like I'm writing across racial lines and class lines and often gender lines and I guess religion lines too, right? Since we're having this talk about Judaism. But there's something about telling that story which felt like such an important story to tell. It is the story of Chicago. It is the story of the nation. It's the story of cities. I could find that connection in there. Sascha was saying, like the importance of practicing empathy, which is so much of writing, of doing the work to feel, to put yourself in other people's shoes, to learn about their stories and to try to tell them the best way possible.
It's like I'm listening to this whole conversation, which of course has gone way past any conversation about Judaism, right? But because of our history, because of the stuff we've experienced, and I'll speak for my own family, my father, intensely interested in politics and intensely interested in current events. Why? Because, that, by the way, that was like the most Jewish shit I've ever done in my life. Why?
Why? Why? No, you could have said it higher with the hands up turned. Why?
I better make it into the fucking show.
Yeah.
Because that shit has a material impact on our lives. We've seen it happen before, which is that if you take your eye off the fucking ball, guess what? They show up at your door, they take you, they throw you in a fucking train, and they take your house. So, it's like, this is the stuff that I grew up as a Jew being like really interested in, because this was the stuff that my family talked about, because we felt like it was important, because again, it had a material impact on us. And part of the experience of being a child of a survivor, frankly, is feeling like at any time, shit could go really bad. At any time. Yeah. That's not a uniquely Jewish experience. I should say that. It's not at all, Right.
I gotta say, listening to what you just shared, Sascha, thinking about how I was socialized, both to celebrate the freedoms that came with the successes of the civil rights movement, only to kind of stumble into an awareness, by virtue of Rodney King and the stuff that started to just seep into my consciousness. It feels actually a lot more like Ben's story in terms of this upbringing that wasn't conscious like yours. But the irony is that the three of us end up in the same place. Obviously I'm living this Black experience, but by dint of some, really diverse paths that the three of us journeyed, we all end up in this space where our understanding of the potential for harm to other people animates the work we do.
Absolutely.
And, I'm really grateful for being on this journey with both of you, brother.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Man, Sascha, it was so great to have you on the show. It really means a lot that you're participating in this with us. And, the first question that Khalil asked you was, how did you meet me? And what was your first impression? And I want to ask you about your first impression when you met Khalil, because when we were in our early 20s, like just out of college, you came to Chicago one winter, and it was the first time that you met him.
Well, it's funny, because when I met Khalil, he was on this track to be like an accountant or something. You were working at PwC.
Deloitte and Touche.
Deloitte and Touche. Okay, so I remember meeting him and being like, because of course Ben and I were like, we had no hope of a career whatsoever. Like it was like the best. We were both
Degenerates.
like, oh, we're going to be like writers, which of course was like, ridiculous. And so I remember meeting you and being like, wow, man, Khalil really has it together. But here's what I really remember, and this is the only thing that matters. I remember we went out to dinner, and Khalil opened his car door, and he reached down, and all of a sudden he brought back $40. And I was like, what the fuck? And Khalil's like, yep. I just found it. And we're like, get the fuck out of here. And then he reached out again and he pulled out another $40. Remember this, Khalil? You found all this money on the street. Yeah. And then you took us all out to pizza.
It was like negative. It was like negative 20. It was negative 20 out.
I don't even remember this.
And we went to Giordano's, and that money covered all the pizza and beer.
This brings us all the way back full circle to Ben being
to Mr. Levi and that $5 out the synagogue. Yes.
If you ask Khalil,
Mr. Levi,
like, hey, I take everybody out to pizza.
That's right.
I take the Jews out. I take the Jews out for pizza. It's not. If you find $20,
I take them to pizza. That's what I do, Mr.
Levy. Oh my God! No, that's hilarious. Yeah. That is hilarious. All right. Well, you know what? I think it's fair to say, Ben, that I love Sascha too. Is that all right? Is that all right with you?
Yeah. 100%,
right.
Of course.
I needed that, man. Sascha. I'm not gonna lie.
He's so lovable.
I love you guys.
He's so lovable.
I love you.
Love you, Sascha.
Some of My Best Friends Are is a production of Pushkin Industries. The show is written and hosted by me, Khalil Gibran Muhammad, and my best friend, Ben Austen.
Produced by Cher Vincent and edited by Karen Shakurji. Our engineer is Martine Gonzalez. Our associate editor is Keishel Williams. Our associate producer is Lucy Sullivan. And our showrunner is Sasha Matthias.
Our executive producers are Lital Molad and Mia LaBelle.
And special thanks, of course, to Sascha Penn. Not just one of my best friends, one of my two best friends.
At Pushkin, thanks to Heather Fain, Carly Migliori, John Schnars, and Jacob Weisberg.
Our theme song, Little Lily, is by fellow Chicagoan Avery R. Young from his amazing album Tubman. You will definitely want to check out more of his music at his website, averyryoung.com.
You can find Pushkin on all social platforms at Pushkin Pods, and you can sign up for our newsletter at pushkin.fm. To find more Pushkin podcasts, listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to listen.
If you love Some of My Best Friends Are, and any of the other shows from Pushkin Industries, consider subscribing to Pushkin Plus.
Pushkin Plus is a podcast subscription that offers bonus content and uninterrupted listening for $4.99 a month.
Look for Pushkin Plus on Apple Podcast subscriptions. If you like this show, please give it a 5-star review. And please tell some of your best friends about it. Like a lot of your best friends.
All of your best friends.
All of your best friends.
Now.
It's so complicated. It's so complicated.
Hey, you guys. It's Hanukkah time, and I learned how to say Happy Holidays. Shag Sameah, right?
Oh, man.
Did I get that right? Did I get that right? Yes.
You killed it. This guy. Shag Sameah. All right. Do you want to correct him or should I, Ben? You decide.
Chag Sameah.